Most people think of summer camp as sunshine and s'mores. I think of it as a place where the woods remember, and the rules aren't for fun. Welcome to Camp Havenwood, nestled deep in the Serpentine Ridge of West Virginia. A place that felt less like a new beginning and more like a penance. My name is Alex Parker, and I came here running from my grief. Instead, I was given 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the creepiest place you've ever been in the woods? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to join our campfire, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because at Havenwood, the pines don't just whisper, they watch. The season begins now. The pines at Camp Havenwood didn't just whisper with the West Virginian wind. They whispered ancient secrets, buried sorrows. And if I listened closely enough in the dead of night, they seemed to whisper the name of my sister, Lily, an echo I'd do, driven hundreds of miles across state lines to try and escape. My name is Alex Parker, ex-elementary school teacher, current fugitive from a grief so profound it had become a second shadow. Lily had loved the woods, right up until they'd claimed her during a camping trip I was supposed to be supervising. Yearly's and more see it. Now, the towering trees and the dappled sunlight of Camp Havenwood, nestled deep within the rugged folds of the Serpentine Ridge, felt less like a new beginning and more like a perverse, self-inflicted penance. The camp itself possessed a rustic, almost anachronistic charm. Log cabins with fieldstone chimneys, a sprawling timber-framed mess hall, and a clear, fast-flowing creek. Viridian Creek, the brochure had called it, that snaked its way along the property's western edge. But beneath the idyllic surface, there was an undercurrent, a subtle wrongness. The silence between bird calls felt too profound. The shadows beneath the ancient hemlocks seemed too languid here, darker than they should. Eliza Montgomery, the camp director, greeted me with a warm, grandmotherly smile that didn't quite reach her disconcertingly pale blue eyes. She was a woman in her late 50s, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her movements economical and precise, respected, almost revered, by the returning staff, like Marcus Reed, a taciturn, seasoned counselor who offered me a curt nod. Eliza embodied the spirit of Camp Havenwood, wholesome, traditional, and deeply rooted in the local lore. She walked me through the orientation, her voice a soothing balm, until she handed me a small, linen-bound staff handbook. Tucked inside, on a separate age-yellowed card, were 3 handwritten rules, penned in a stark, no-nonsense script. These are Havenwood traditions, Alex, Eliza said, her smile softening, but her gaze becoming oddly distant, almost veiled, passed down through generations. They help ensure harmony with the land, with the children. Please, adhere to them closely. The rules were simple, yet deeply unsettling. The creek water runs red for 1 hour at high noon. Do not let campers near it. You find small carved wooden figures left on cabin porches. Burn them. Don't keep them. A camper claims the old hermit in the woods gave them a gift. Confiscate the gift and send the camper to Nurse Holloway immediately. I nodded, feigning understanding, though a cold knot was already tightening in my stomach. Traditions, I echoed. Eliza's smile returned, brighter this time, but her pale eyes lingered on me a moment too long, as if searching for something. Later, as I unpacked in my assigned cabin, a small rustic affair smelling faintly of pine needles and damp earth, I noticed it, etched almost invisibly into the weathered wood of the windowsill, nearly obscured by a fresh coat of varnish, was a crude, spidery symbol. A spiral connected to a series of sharp triangular marks. It looked unsettlingly like a weeping eye, and beneath it, so faint I almost missed it, someone had scratched a single desperate word. Listen. The first few days of camp at Havenwood unfolded with a deceptive, sun-dappled normality. Children's laughter echoed through the pines. The scent of wood smoke and toasted marshmallows mingled with the crisp mountain air, and my own ghosts, for a blessed while, seemed to retreat into the shadows. I threw myself into the rhythms of camp life. Nature hikes, arts and crafts, campfire stories, finding a fragile solace in the innocent energy of the campers. I connected easily with most of them, my teacher instincts kicking in. But it was 10-year-old Lucy Chen, a quiet, observant girl with a startlingly perceptive gaze, and a sketchbook always in hand, who particularly drew my attention. There was an old soul quality about her, a sensitivity that reminded me achingly of Lily. Marcus Reed, the veteran counselor, remained an enigma. Efficient, knowledgeable about the woods, but reserved to the point of being taciturn. He offered practical advice on managing homesick campers and avoiding poison ivy, but steered clear of any deeper conversation about the camp's peculiarities. Then, on the third day, precisely as the sun reached its zenith, the first rule made its unnerving debut. I was leading my group, Lucy among them, on a nature walk along the banks of Viridian Creek. The water, moments before crystal clear and babbling cheerfully over moss-covered stones, began to change. A faint pinkish tinge at first, then deepening, swirling, until the entire creek ran a vivid, shocking crimson, like diluted blood. A faint, metallic tang, mixed with the scent of wet earth, and something else, something vaguely organic and unsettling, rose from its surface. The children gasped, a mixture of fascination and unease. "Wow, Kool-Aid Creek," one boy exclaimed, but Lucy Chen just stared, her small face pale, her perceptive eyes wide with a nascent, unchildlike fear. "Mr. Parker," she whispered, tugging on my sleeve. "The water, it looks like it's crying blood." Before I could formulate a response, Eliza Montgomery appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, her usual calm demeanor now overlaid with a subtle steel-edged urgency. "Children, children," she called, her voice a little too bright. "Time for arts and crafts. The creek is having one of its special moments. Best to let it be." She smoothly herded them away, her gaze flicking towards me, a silent, pointed reminder of the rule. Later, she explained it away as a rare natural blooming of iron-rich sediment from an upstream spring, activated by the midday sun. It sounded plausible, almost, but the way Lucy had looked at the water, the way Eliza had materialized so quickly, it left a residue of disquiet. One boy, a boisterous redhead named Tom, had splashed his hands in the water just before Eliza arrived. That night, he complained of an itchy rash and unsettling, vivid dreams he couldn't quite describe. The next morning, the second rule manifested. As I stepped out of my cabin, I found it. A small, crudely carved wooden figure, no bigger than my thumb, placed neatly on the porch railing. It was a stylized representation of a howling wolf cub, its tiny wooden fangs bared. It was surprisingly detailed for such a rough carving, and unnervingly evocative. Later, at breakfast, a visibly pale Lily Chen, Lucy's usually more outgoing cabin mate, showed me an almost identical figure. This one, a screaming child that she'd found on her own porch. Eliza, when I brought them to her attention, simply smiled that enigmatic, distant smile. "Ah, yes, the forest's little offerings," she said, her voice soft. "A charming, if rather primitive, local tradition. The old ways say we should return them to the fire, Alex. A gesture of gratitude helps keep the balance, you see." She gathered the small, disturbing totems from my hand, and without another word, tossed them into the crackling flames of the morning mess hall fireplace. The wood hissed, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the wolf cub's carved eyes gleam red in the embers before it was consumed. Lucy Chen, who had silently watched the exchange, looked inexplicably saddened by their destruction. That evening, as a premature twilight began to settle over the valley, I was walking near the edge of the woods. The cicadas song a shrill, incessant hum, and beneath it, I heard something else, a whisper, faint and low, almost lost in the chirping, seeming to drift from the deepest, darkest part of the pines. It wasn't words, not quite, more like a sighing, and for a terrifying instant, I could have sworn it was calling a name, Lucy's. The unsettling incidents began to accumulate, small tears in the idyllic fabric of Camp Havenwood. Tom, the boy who'd touched the Crimson Creek water, became withdrawn, his nights plagued by vivid, disturbing dreams he couldn't articulate, but which left him pale and trembling by morning. He started sketching compulsively in his notebook. Not at camp scenes, but strange, spidery figures lurking amidst dark trees, and swirling red patterns that mirrored the brief, bloody transformation of Viridian Creek. His cabin mates reported he'd begun talking in his sleep, muttering about an old man with eyes like bark who lived deep in the woods. The other counselors, including the usually unflappable Marcus Reed, seemed to notice the shift in the camp's atmosphere, the subtle undercurrent of anxiety that now permeated the children's laughter. But they adhered to an unspoken code of silence, deflecting my tentative questions with vague platitudes about mountain superstitions or the power of suggestion on young minds. Eliza Montgomery, however, seemed almost serene, her calm a jarring contrast to the growing unease. Then, the third rule made its presence known. It was late afternoon, during free time. A small, usually timid girl named Samira Patel, from Lucy Chen's cabin, ran to me, her face a mixture of excitement and a deeper, unnameable fear. It was a crudely fashioned necklace, a string of dried, unfamiliar berries interspersed with small, polished animal knuckle bones, and at its center, a single, yellowed, wickedly sharp canine tooth. "Mr. Parker, look," Samira stammered, holding it out. "The old hermit in the woods, he gave it to me," he said. "He said it was special, to keep the bad dreams away." A chill, colder than the mountain air, traced its way down my spine. The necklace felt unnaturally cold to the touch, and it emanated a faint, musky, distinctly animalistic odor. I remembered Eliza's third rule with a jolt. A camper claims the old hermit in the woods gave them a gift. Confiscate the gift, and send the camper to Nurse Holloway immediately. Trying to keep my voice even, I gently took the grotesque offering from Samira. "That's very interesting, Samira. Why don't we go see Nurse Holloway? She likes to know about all the special things found around camp." Nurse Holloway, a stern, apricot-fronted older woman named Mildred Thorne, no relation to the Marcus, as far as I knew, though the shared surname felt like another of Havenwood's unsettling coincidences. Accepted the necklace with a grim practiced air, her lips a thin, disapproving line. She didn't ask questions. She simply took it, dropped it into a locked metal box she kept under her desk, gave Samira a glass of milky, strangely sweet-smelling herbal tea, and instructed her to lie down in the infirmary's quiet room for observation. The whole exchange was efficient, unsettling, and profoundly disturbing in its lack of normal human reaction. Later that evening, I tried to talk to Eliza Montgomery about the hermit. Her smile was gentle, almost pitying. "Alex, dear," she said, her voice soft as rose petals. "That old hermit is just a local bogeyman, a story we tell to keep the children from wandering too far into the deep woods. They have such vivid imaginations, don't they? Little Samira probably found that trinket herself and just embroidered a tale around it." She patted my arm. "Don't you worry your head about such fancies." But her pale blue eyes, as she said it, were sharp as ice, dissecting my reaction, searching for any lingering doubt. Marcus Reed, however, sought me out after Eliza had gone, his usual guarded expression replaced by one of genuine concern. "Don't buy all that bogeyman crap, Parker," he muttered, looking over his shoulder as if expecting to be overheard. "There is someone or something out there. Been leaving those damn carvings and gifts for years, and the kids who get 'em, they ain't always right afterwards." He hesitated. "Eliza, she knows more than she lets on. A lot more. Just watch your back, and watch the kids, especially Lucy Chen. She's different, like some of the others were before." Before what, he didn't say. He just shook his head and walked away, leaving me with a fresh cafe layer of dread. That night, sorting through some old camp brochures in a dusty storage closet for an upcoming activity roster, I found it. A tattered, hand-drawn map of the Camp Havenwood grounds and the surrounding Serpentine Ridge. It was clearly very old. The ink faded, the paper brittle. Most of it was standard topographical detail. But in one corner, deep within the marked wilderness area, near a barely discernible symbol for Viridian Creek source, someone had drawn a crude, almost childlike depiction of a solitary hunched figure standing beside a misshapen cabin. And next to it, in faint, spidery lettering, the words, "His hunger is old. He watches. He wakes. He takes." And disturbingly, the archaic symbol for the creek source on this old map was identical to the weeping eye I'd found carved into my own windowsill. The strange, chilling map of the Serpentine Ridge, with its ominous depiction of the Hermit and his hunger, became a focal point for my growing anxieties. The subtle dread that had permeated Camp Havenwood since my arrival was now coalescing into a distinct, palpable fear. My past trauma, the one involving Lily and the deep woods, felt less like a shadow and more like a grim foreshadowing. I started to believe, with a certainty that terrified me, that this place, these rules, this hermit, were all threads in a tapestry far darker and more ancient than Eliza Montgomery, with her gentle smiles and evasive answers, would ever admit. Lucy Chen, in particular, seemed to be slipping further into a world of her own. Her bright curiosity was being replaced by a quiet, watchful intensity. Her sketchbook, once filled with charming drawings of camp life and forest creatures, now featured disturbing, intricate patterns, swirling vortexes, and unsettlingly detailed depictions of shadowed figures with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed with a faint, internal light. She'd often be found staring intently towards the deepest part of the woods, her lips moving silently, as if in conversation with someone only she could see. She spoke less, but when she did, it was often in riddles, or with a strange adult solemnity about the secrets the trees keep, and the songs the creek sings when no one is listening. Marcus Reed, saying my mounting concern, and perhaps sensing a kindred spirit in my unwillingness to accept the camp's superficial peace, became a more willing, if still cautious ally. "Eliza. She's from an old family around here," he told me one evening, as we sat by the dying embers of the campfire, long after the children were asleep. "The Montgomerys practically are Serpentine Ridge. They've run this camp or something like it on this land for, well, longer than anyone can rightly remember." He poked at the coals with a stick. "There's always been talk, whispers, about the old ways, about why Havenwood always seems to prosper, even when other camps struggle. About why some kids just seem to thrive here, get real intense, while others just fade." His voice dropped. "And why every few years a kid goes missing. Hiker, camper, doesn't much matter. Usually blamed on the wilderness. But the locals, they know better." He then admitted he'd been collecting things, oddments, snippets of information, hushed rumors, items left behind by previous counselors who like the one whose notebook I'd found, had quit suddenly. He led me to his own cabin, more a cluttered den of hoarded secrets than a living space. And there, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, was his stash. A few more of those unsettling carved wooden figures, clearly very old. A tarnished silver locket containing a faded daguerreotype of a grim-faced woman who bore a striking resemblance to Eliza. A handful of newspaper clippings dating back decades, detailing unsolved disappearances in the Serpentine Ridge area. And most disturbingly, a thick, leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with spidery, archaic script. "Found this in the old root cellar beneath the main lodge," Marcus said, his voice low. "Eliza keeps it locked up tight, but the hinges rusted through last spring." The ledger was a chronicle, not of camp finances or attendance records, but of something far more sinister. It dated back to the late 1800s, to the founding of the original Montgomery homestead on this land. The early entries spoke of hardship, of failed crops, of a harsh, unforgiving wilderness. Then, a shift. Entries referencing the pact, the arrangement with the Ancient Slumberer of the Ridge, the first tide, and then, chillingly, a recurring coded entry every few years, alongside a list of names, children's names. The pines were fed. The creek ran clear. The haven remains. The most recent entries, signed with a flowing EM, were more direct, less coded, speaking of maintaining the balance, of necessary offerings, of the whispers demanding their due. Lily Chen, the previous camper, was listed on the last legible page. And beside her name, a single, freshly penned checkmark. Another child, this one a boy named Noah, from a different cabin group, began exhibiting the same unsettling symptoms as Tom had earlier: night terrors, withdrawn behavior, and a newfound obsession with carving small, crude figures from twigs and twigs, and scraps of wood. He claimed the man with eyes like moss had shown him how, had told him the figures would keep the sad whispers away. Eliza's response was swift, almost too swift. Noah was sent home within hours. A terse note to his parents, citing an acute and unmanageable homesickness. Late one evening, driven by a cold, desperate hunch, I watched Eliza Montgomery again. True to my suspicions, she took that barely visible, overgrown path leading from behind the mess hall, deep into the woods towards Viridian Creek, carrying a small canvas-wrapped bundle. This time, I followed, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The path was more treacherous, more winding than I had imagined, leading to a secluded, almost hidden clearing, dominated by a circle of ancient, moss-covered standing stones, the kind I'd only ever read about in books on Celtic folklore. And in the center of the circle, directly beside the now murmuring Viridian Creek, was a crude, flat-topped altar stone, heavily stained with something dark. Eliza placed her bundle upon it, then began to chant, her voice low and rhythmic, in that same strange, guttural language I'd heard echoes of before. I couldn't understand the words, but the intent, the ancient, sacrificial reverence, was chillingly clear. I didn't dare stay longer, but as I retreated, I saw, or thought I saw, a movement at the edge of the clearing, a tall, gaunt figure merging with the shadows of the ancient pines. The Hermit, and in his hand he seemed to be holding a small, freshly carved wooden doll. As I stumbled back to my cabin, my mind reeling, I found a new addition to my own porch. A single, perfectly preserved raven's feather, tied with a strand of what looked like human hair. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth. And something else. Something that reminded me, with a fresh stab of grief, of the incense they'd burned at Lily's memorial. The weight of the hidden ledger, with its chilling chronicle of tithes and offerings to the Ancient Slumberer of the Ridge, pressed down on Alex Parker, with an almost physical force. Lily Shen's name, with that fresh damning checkmark beside it, had been a ghost at the periphery of his thoughts. Now, with Noah's sudden removal and Lucy Chen's increasingly strange, trance-like behavior, her whispered conversations with an unseen friend in the pines, her obsessive drawings of a many-eyed entity emerging from Viridian Creek, the horrifying pattern was undeniable. Eliza Montgomery wasn't just a camp director adhering to quaint, unsettling traditions. She was a custodian of something ancient, something hungry, and something that demanded periodic, terrible sustenance. The summer solstice was fast approaching, a date Marcus Reed had flagged from his own fragmented research into local folklore as a historically significant time for old rituals in the Serpentine Ridge. The veil is thinnest then, they say, he'd muttered, his usual cynicism tinged with a rare, genuine fear, when the woods breathed differently. And as if to confirm his words, the phenomena at Camp Havenwood intensified. The midday reddening of Viridian Creek became a violent boiling surge, its waters thick and opaque as arterial blood, the metallic stench almost unbearable. Carved wooden figures, more grotesque and numerous than before, appeared on every cabin porch, some depicting children in poses of supplication or terror. And the whispers were no longer confined to deep woods. They seemed to seep from the very walls of the cabins, from the sighing pines, even from the crackling static of the camp's old radio. Always calling, always promising, hungry. Then, on the eve of the solstice, Lucy Chen vanished from her bunk. Eliza Montgomery orchestrated a search, her public display of concern impeccable, her calls for calm authoritative. But Alex, watching her carefully, saw the flicker of something else in her pale blue eyes, a grim satisfaction, a ritualistic preparedness. This wasn't a search, it was a procession. Marcus, his face a mask of weary resignation, confirmed Alex's fears. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "This is how it always happens. The special one. The offering." The offering, driven by a desperate, almost suicidal resolve, fueled by the ghost of his own lost Lily, and the raw protective instinct that the innocence of Lucy Chen had awakened in him. Warnings. Decided to act. He wouldn't let another child be consumed by the secrets annotated at Serpentine Ridge. Marcus, after a moment of profound internal struggle, agreed to help. "I've stood by and watched too many times, Parker," he said, his voice thick with a guilt that mirrored Alex's own. Not this time. Following the almost invisible overgrown trail Alex had seen Eliza take, the one leading to the circle of standing stones, they plunged into the woods as a blood-red solstice moon began to rise, casting long, skeletal shadows through the ancient pines. The whispers were deafening here, a chorus of sibilant, inhuman voices promising power, peace, oblivion. Strange bioluminescent fungi pulsed with an eerie light on the forest floor, illuminating their path. They found the clearing, bathed in the sanguine glow of the solstice moon. Eliza Montgomery stood before the dark-stained altar stone, her arms raised, her voice now a resonant, almost hypnotic chant in that strange, guttural language Alex had heard before. Lucy Chen lay on the altar, pale and still, seemingly in a deep trance. A single, perfect crimson rose, a flower not native to these woods, clutched in her small hand. Around the clearing, tethered to the standing stones, were dozens, perhaps hundreds, of those carved wooden figures, their tiny, unseeing eyes fixed on the unconscious child. "The pact must be honored." Eliza's voice rose, ringing through the unnatural stillness of the clearing. The Ancient Slumberer demands its due, so that Havenwood may endure, so that the ridge may grant its blessings. She is the chosen vessel, pure and receptive. Eliza, stop this madness! Alex yelled, stepping into the clearing, Marcus at his side, both of them gripping sturdy branches they'd picked up as makeshift weapons. Eliza turned, her face no longer the gentle, grandmotherly mask Alex knew, but a roaring, ecstatic visage of a high priestess, her eyes glowing with a reflected unnatural light. "Foolish boy," she hissed, her voice taking on the same multi-layered, whispering quality as the voices in the woods. "You cannot comprehend the balance, the necessity. For generations my family has tended this sacred grove, paid the price for peace and prosperity. She is not a sacrifice. She is an offering, a bridge between worlds." As she spoke, the very air in the clearing seemed to thicken, to vibrate with an unseen power. The shadows beneath the trees deepened, coalesced, and from them, a form began to emerge. Not the Hermit Alex had half expected, but something far older, far more terrifying. It was a shifting, vaguely humanoid shape, composed of twisted roots, grasping branches, and countless, luminous, unblinking eyes that seemed to stare directly into Alex's soul. The forest entity, the Ancient Slumberer. Its presence was a wave of primal terror, crushing and absolute. Whispers swirled around it, promising untold knowledge, infinite sorrow. But just as Eliza raised a ceremonial obsidian-bladed knife over Lucy, another figure stumbled from the deepest shadows of the pines. Gaunt, ragged, his skin like weathered bark, his eyes burning with a desperate, sorrowful light. It was Daniel Montgomery, the Hermit, Eliza's lost brother. He was no longer entirely human, his form subtly intertwined with the very essence of the woods he inhabited. But his will, it seemed, was still his own. "Sister, no more," Daniel rasped, his voice like the creak of ancient trees. "The price, it is too high. The woods, they weep for these stolen children." He held out a gnarled hand, and from it, a soft, silvery light began to emanate. He was not just a victim of the forest. He had, in his long, isolated communion, learned some of its deeper, older secrets. Secrets even Eliza, in her hubris, had overlooked. The forest entity recoiled slightly from the silver light, its myriad eyes narrowing in something that looked like surprise, or perhaps pain. The final confrontation for Lucy Chen's soul, and for the cursed heart of Camp Havenwood, had begun. The clearing became a battleground of unseen forces and desperate human courage. Eliza Montgomery, her face contorted with rage at her brother's intervention, shrieked in that ancient, guttural tongue, urging the forest entity forward. The many-eyed horror responded, its shadowy tendrils of root and branch lashing out, the whispers in the air intensifying into a psychic assault that battered Alex and Marcus, filling their minds with images of their deepest fears and failures. Alex saw Lily, his sister, her eyes accusing, lost in an endless, burning forest. Marcus stumbled, clutching his head, relieving some unspoken trauma from his own past military service. But Daniel Montgomery stood firm, his gnarled hand still radiating that soft, protective silver light. It wasn't an aggressive force, but it seemed to create a barrier, a sanctuary of sorts, that held the entity's direct physical manifestations at bay, at least momentarily. "The ridge remembers its true guardian, sister," Daniel said, his voice gaining a strange, resonant strength. "Not those who would bleed it for power, but those who understand its heart." He took a stumbling step towards the altar. "He's trying to break the link," Alex realized, shaking off the last vestiges of the entity's psychic attack. "The offering, Lucy, she's the focal point. Marcus, we have to get her out of that circle." While Eliza screamed inarticulate curses, distracted by her brother's unexpected defiance. Alex and Marcus charged the altar. The carved wooden figures tethered to the standing stones seemed to writhe, their tiny wooden eyes glinting with malevolent red light, the air around them thick with the scent of decay and fear. One of the entity's shadowy tendrils, quicker than thought, whipped out, catching Marcus across the arm, sending him sprawling with a cry of pain. Alex reached Lucy. She was still in that deep, unnatural trance, the crimson rose clutched tightly in her hand, its thorns already drawing tiny pinpricks of blood. As Alex tried to lift her, the ground beneath the altar stone began to glow with that same sickly green light Hyde seen from deeper in the woods, and a low, powerful thrumming, like a giant heartbeat, resonated up through his boots. The entity was drawing power from her, from the offering. "Why the silver?" Daniel gasped, struggling against a wave of psychic pressure that made him stagger. The old roots run deep beneath this stone. They drink the silver from the deep earth. It can sever. Alex understood. The silver light Daniel was channeling wasn't just a protective ward. It was anathema to the entity if applied directly to its connection point. But Daniel was weakening, the effort of holding back the full force of the elder thing, and his sister's rage clearly taking its toll. "Lucy! Lucy, wake up!" Alex shouted, gently shaking the girl. Her eyelids fluttered. He saw the obsidian knife in Eliza's hand, saw her lunging towards them, her face a mask of insane fury. There was no time. With a desperate prayer, Alex snatched the tarnished silver locket Marcus had shown him, the one with the daguerreotype of the grim-faced Montgomery ancestor. From around his own neck, Marcus had pressed it into his hand earlier, muttering something about old family silver sometimes has its own say. He didn't know if it would work, but it was all he had. He pressed the cold silver of the locket hard against the base of the altar stone, directly onto one of the thick, pulsating root-like tendrils that seemed to be anchoring it to the earth, the very spot from which the unnatural thrumming seemed strongest. The effect was instantaneous and violent. A piercing, inhuman shriek ripped through the clearing, louder than any thunder. The silver locket glowed with an intense, white-hot light, burning Alex's hand. The root-like tendril beneath it recoiled as if struck by lightning, then began to blacken and char, smoke pouring from it with the stench of 1,000 burning, bitter herbs. The thrumming ceased. The glowing symbols on the ground faded. The forest entity let out a sound that was less a roar and more a drawn-out, rattling sigh of immense ancient pain, its many-eyed form flickering, then rapidly receding back into the deepest shadows of the pines, as if its anchor to this place, to this specific offering, had been violently severed. Eliza Montgomery collapsed, the obsidian knife clattering uselessly to the ground, her borrowed power draining away from her like water from a sieve. She looked suddenly old, frail, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding of what she had done, what she had lost. Daniel Montgomery, with a final weary sigh, sank to his knees, the silver light around him sputtering and dying. He looked at Alex, a faint, almost peaceful smile touching his ravaged features, before his eyes closed. Lucy Chen gasped, her eyes flying open, no longer vacant, but filled with a child's pure, unadulterated terror. Alex scooped her up, his burned hand throbbing, and he and Marcus, who was clutching his bleeding arm, stumbled out of the desecrated clearing, leaving the fallen Eliza and the still form of her brother behind. The solstice moon now beginning its slow descent towards a pale, indifferent dawn. The whispers in the pines had, for now, fallen silent. In the chaotic aftermath, as a weak gray sun rose over a traumatized Camp Havenwood, the official story began to take shape with an almost practiced efficiency. A freak localized earthquake had apparently struck the Serpentine Ridge, causing minor structural damage to the camp, and a regrettable, tragic hiking accident involving the camp director, Eliza Montgomery, and her long-lost, mentally unwell brother Daniel, both of whom were now presumed lost in the rugged wilderness. Lucy Chen, along with a few other children who had wandered off during the confusion, were found by Alex and Marcus, frightened but unharmed. Norza Holloway, stoic and unreadable, administered sedatives and platitudes. The camp was closed down immediately, pending a full safety review. The truth, like so many things in those ancient woods, was quickly, efficiently buried. Alex Parker returned to a world that no longer looked the same. The vibrant colors of city life seemed muted. The cacophony of urban noise, a pale imitation of the silence he now sometimes craved, sometimes feared. The guilt over his sister Lily's death hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. He had faced a different kind of darkness in those woods, fought a different kind of monster, and he had, in some small way, saved a child. It wasn't absolution, not by a long shot, but it was something. He found he could finally look at Lily's photograph without the same crushing weight of despair. Marcus Reed, true to his word, quit Havenwood for good. He and Alex kept in touch, a bond forged in shared terror and unspoken truths. Marcus eventually wrote a thinly veiled fictional account of their experiences, a cult-hit horror novel that some critics praised for its unflinching psychological realism and its hauntingly authentic depiction of Appalachian folklore. None of them knew how close to the bone it truly was. Lucy Chen, after a period of intense therapy, seemed to recover, at least outwardly. She rarely spoke of her time at Camp Havenwood, but her childhood passion for drawing took a new, more focused turn. She began to create stunningly detailed, achingly beautiful, yet deeply unsettling charcoal sketches of ancient forests, of trees with faces, of shadowed figures with luminous eyes, a work imbued with a wisdom and a sorrow far beyond her years. Her parents, attributing it to a vivid imagination sparked by her ordeal, encouraged her talent, unaware of the true source of her inspiration. As for Alex, he eventually went back to teaching, but not in a traditional school. He found work at a wilderness therapy program for troubled teens, using the quiet strength and resilience he discovered within himself in the Serpentine Ridge to help others navigate their own internal forests. He never forgot the whispers in the pines, the Crimson Creek, or the oppressive weight of the forest entity. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that such ancient things didn't truly die. They merely slept, waiting for the right conditions, the right invitation, the right offering to stir once more. Years later, while hiking alone in a remote section of the Blue Ridge Mountains, hundreds of miles from West Virginia, Alex stumbled upon a small, almost forgotten clearing. At its center stood a circle of weathered, moss-covered stones. There was no altar, no overt sign of past rituals. But the air was a little too still, the silence a little too profound. And nestled at the base of the largest stone, as if left there just moments before, was a small, freshly carved wooden figure of a child, its tiny wooden eyes staring up at him with an unnerving, blank entreaty. He didn't burn it. He didn't keep it. He simply turned and walked away. The faint, almost inaudible scent of old roses and damp earth clinging to him, a reminder that some secrets once unearthed could never truly be reburied. The woods, he knew, always remembered, and sometimes they still whispered. This time, however, he chose not to listen too closely. Camp Havenwood holds its secrets deep beneath the pines. Alex Parker learned that some traditions are more ancient and more hungry than any brochure would tell you. The rules were just a fragile shield against the true nature of the ridge. The harvest is over for now. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the final chilling detail, the twist that reveals the true Ongoing price of entering Camp Havenwood. The last few moments will leave you looking differently at the woods. What do you think the forest entity is? What became of Eliza and Daniel Montgomery? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the summer at Havenwood, if the wood